Awesome. All right. So like I said, I prepared minimally for this. I was preparing to get a little bit more prepped for this, but life gets in the way. And, what's the point of getting good at your craft if you're not able to wing it sometimes? Don't tell my clients I said that. All right, let's go. Let's go. All right, so grocery store shopping app is the name of the game. Huge is too big. All right, that's what we're working on. So let's get clear about the problem statement. Actually, I'm going to do this a little bit more through jobs to be done framework. And so we're going to be thinking about this as what is our big job. So if you're unfamiliar with jobs to be done, the basic idea is this. For every need or want that you have in your life, you can think about that as a job. And just like a real job, you would hire something or someone to fill that job. And so looking at things through that lens, you can really define what is the job that I'm trying to solve and what do I hire for that. For a lot of these things, like you could think about travel, moving around, transportation. You could think about that as a job. So if I'm trying to get to the park that's a couple blocks away, what are the ways that I can solve that problem? Or what are the things that I can hire for that job? I can hire a car, I can hire a bike, I can rent a scooter, I can take an Uber. These are all different solutions or things that I can hire for this job. So when we think about this as well, we want to make sure that we're shaping our solution so that it fits the job, because our job will be our North Star for designing. So there's different ways that you could do jobs to be done. I really like Jim Kalbach's framework of what's the big job and what are the sub jobs underneath it. So let's first cover what the big job is. So the big job of something like this would be, I need to remember what things to buy at the grocery store. The goal of writing a job story is that we want to just keep them very simple. We don't want to add things like context. We don't want to add anything related to a solution. It's really just focused on the core problem. It's really, I need to keep track of the things that I need to buy at the grocery store. Okay, awesome. So underneath a big job is smaller jobs that we're also trying to solve. So it's a lot of the things that I described as kind of the pain points around the shopping experience and around having a grocery shopping list. So let's list some of those things. So a small job would be let's see, things to buy aren't organized. Causing me to what? To zigzag around the store. This always seems to happen just when you're in a rush, when you just need to buy a handful of things because you're late to host dinner or something like that. And then you're just really getting your laps in going all around the grocery store. Here's a good one. So staples, I don't know if that translates well, but basically the things that you get all the time. I'm drinking coffee. My wife and I go through a lot of coffee creamer. It's something that we buy pretty much every time we go to the grocery store. And yet, if you use any of these just basic list app, there's no concept of staples or things that you get often, or even this concept of what frequency you buy things. Because there's certain things that I probably buy monthly, buy weekly, buy quarterly. And so there's some of those things that I forget to buy until I'm out. So even that, we can break that out. Just even listing that out, that is a job as well. Now, the number of small jobs that you will have for any kind of big job, they can get really large. I'm talking like 50, 60, 70 small jobs. And this is where I was getting into, in that the audience, even for something like buying groceries, you can list a plethora of jobs. Now, what we're doing right now, this is designing for the problem that we have. And so when you're designing for yourself, or you're designing for a problem that you have, aka scratching your own itch, then you have a little bit more leeway with this, where it's a lot easier to just think back of what kind of problems do I have. And this also applies to just broad apps like this, like grocery shopping is pretty ubiquitous. A lot of people grocery shop in some kind of capacity. And so it's pretty easy to understand some of these things. Now, this kind of stuff of brainstorming, I will caveat, does not work if you're designing for an audience that you're not familiar with, if you are not a part of that audience. Because as humans, our problem solving skills, or our pattern matching skills, are really good to our detriment. And so it's really easy to imagine problems that people might have in an audience. And so it's probably the fastest way to start designing an app and solving problems that you just imagined happened. So this is the big caveat, in that I'm able to list these things because these are pain points that I have. But if I was designing for an audience that I'm not familiar with, or I'm not a part of, or are outside of kind of where I'm at in life as well. So for example, if I'm designing for beginner designers, I was a beginner at one point, I'm not anymore. I'd like to think. And so I can think about some of the problems that I have, but even those might not be relevant anymore because I was a beginner 15 years ago. Wow, that's how you make yourself feel old. So that's the big caveat for this. We have a little bit more leeway with this. This is a little easier to do. And so we're kind of approaching it this way. And it just makes it a lot easier for something like a live stream. Okay. If you have any other small jobs that you could think of, any other pain points with this idea of grocery store shopping app, let me know. I'd like to add them in here. But we're just going to start with a few. These are just kind of some staples, and then we could add some more as well. So in this step is really understanding the jobs that you're trying to solve, because this is your North Star. This is the thing that you're going back to. This is the thing that you're reminding yourself, these are the problems that we're solving, and picking and choosing the ones that we're getting specific about. As the product grows, you can add more jobs that you're solving and offering solutions for. And as you could see, when you look at a lot of these jobs, you can see how this same framework can apply to something like marketing as well. Because what is marketing other than promising that your app will solve some kind of problem? And so if you're saying so if your marketing site is able to say things like, hey, are you wasting time in the grocery store by zigzagging around it? Well, here's a solution. So that's why I really like Jobs to be Done. It's a fantastic methodology. I use it a lot. Oh, I apologize. Just realized my picture-in-picture is over the text. All right. So this is where we start. We're just going to start with those things for now. Let me grab some other stuff right here. Repeating items, staples. Here's one my wife, I'm just gonna add one more. This one my wife really despises. She hates going grocery shopping when there's a lot of people. But she's a realtor, she has an off schedule, she doesn't work a typical 9 to 5. She forgets when those rush hours are. So, I don't want to, or I want to go now, according to some people, you want to talk about the jobs of like I want or I need, or this is what I'm trying to achieve. The I don't is written more like a pain point. And so while I would normally go and edit these and kind of finesse them if I was working on a real project, we're just going to kind of skip over that right now because it still applies and still pretty straightforward. Cool. So the next step, after you've established your North Star, this is what we're shooting for. This is the goal. Where do we go from here? So the next step is something that I do that I don't know if I've seen a lot of other people do it. Let me know if you do something similar to this. I call it dumping the Legos. So as a kid, my brothers and I had a ton of Legos, and like most kids at that time, we just kept them in one massive tub. And so whenever we had an idea for something that we were going to work on, the first thing we would do is take that tub of Legos and dump it on the floor. The reason why you do that is because you don't know what you have until you're able to see things. And so by dumping them out, by spreading them all on the floor, you're able to see what you have available. Because then you're able to start picking out things of, ooh, I'm gonna need this soon, or I'm gonna start organizing them by different aspects. This is also, if you've ever used like Maria Kondo's organizing method, the Sparks Joy method, this is also her same methodology. If you're trying to get organized in your life, get everything out of every single drawer and closet, dump it all on the floor, and then you can start. So we're gonna start by dumping the Legos. What that looks like is just basically stream of consciousness, taking the ideas and the concepts that we have right now and thinking about the needs, the implications, and everything else that we could possibly need for something like this. So let me show you what that looks like to dump the Legos. So I'm going to put my jobs up here. Oh. And we're going to dump the Legos. Okay. Here we go. So things to buy aren't organized, causing me to zigzag around the store. Okay. So, items to buy need to be organized by department. So that means that items to buy need to be categorized by department. Oh, I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. Actually, I'm just going to make these all bigger. Here we go. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay. Items to buy need to be organized by department. items to buy need to be identified to categorize. Categorize. Spelling is hard. Let's see. I have to manually add staples every time. Okay, so if I'm in the concept of like bringing back checked off items, checklist, low friction ways of adding items to my list. This actually reminded me of another pain point that I forgot to add. I want to share my list with family members. Okay, so if part of our small job is sharing with family members, then we need this concept of accounts. We need sharing. I don't remember to buy something until it's out. I don't remember to buy something until it's out. So some kind of frequency of usage. Now, this looks a little chaotic, but essentially what I'm doing is any kind of ideas that get sparked from my North Star, from my jobs. Because what I'm doing is just trying to uncover any kind of considerations, any kind of requirements, any kind of implications that come from these things. And so this is an example of one. I want to share with family members. Okay, so if we're sharing with family members, then we need some kind of concept of syncing. In fact, that's something that I didn't add. Syncing and server cloud storage. Right? And so if this is one of the jobs that we're trying to solve for, I want to share my list with family members. If that's something that we want to tackle, then now we have to come up with a concept of how do we sync things? How do we share things? And so with those things also sparks other considerations. Okay, well, if I have syncing and I have sharing, then I have to have this concept of an account. Because if you've ever downloaded other to-do list apps or even just list apps online, you don't always have to create an account. Because if it's saving it, like say a mobile device, like on your iPhone, then you don't need any account because it's just storing to your local device. But once you start sharing with people, that's when you start all of these implications. There's a web of things that are needed to happen for that to work. And so things like, I need to be able to create an account. And now I need to create some kind of interface in order to share it, to share a list or share an account or create joint ones. So even that, just talking out loud, sharing a list versus sharing accounts, even that is kind of an interesting concept as well. Like, so this is a problem of like, my wife and I use Reminders app, the iOS Reminders app, for both grocery shopping, but also for other lists that we have. Sometimes one of us will forget to share something like, I've created a hardware store list. And so I asked her to go pick up all the things on the hardware store, or pick up things on the hardware store list while she's at the hardware store. Turns out I forgot to share it. I would love to just share any kind of list by default with my wife. As far as like shopping lists, there's no reason why I need to do that. And so even that as a small pain point, as a small job of, I don't want to have to keep thinking about it. I don't want to have to go through the process of sharing every list. Even if you've looked through reminders and done it, it's not super intuitive how to share with people. It's not exactly obvious, both from the sharing perspective and also from receiving a shared thing. It's not super intuitive. And so the fewer times that we have to do that, the better. I would love just account level sharing, because any kind of list that I create, whether that's going to the garden center, going to the hardware store, going to the grocery store, the pharmacy, any of those things, I would love just new lists to be shared across my family. All right, is this making sense? Any questions about kind of that dumping the Legos? I'm gonna take a break for a second, but I'm gonna get back into it. All right, I'm gonna keep going, dumping some Legos. If you also have like ideas that come to mind as well, feel free to jump in and share them as well. I would love input. So I'll just add a header to this. I'll add a couple headers to things. Okay. All right, so keep going with this. All right, items to buy need to be organized by department. Items to buy need to be identified to categorize. So what I mean by that is something like, all right, I add blueberries. If it needs to, in order to organize that into the produce section, there's a couple ways that I can do it. I can manually add things into different categories, which doesn't really solve our problem very well, because now I'm just making the user do that. Albeit I'm giving them a slightly easier way to do it, but this is really a good job for a computer to solve. And so if we can have the system automatically do that, that would be great. So so that idea here is items to buy need to be identified to categorize. Then that means our solution, our app, needs to see when you enter something like blueberries and know that blueberries belong in the produce department. Now that might be tricky. There might be different ways to do that, but just even thinking about what's needed for that allows us to kind of start thinking about those things and be able to start working towards a solution. Especially if you have a developer that you're working with, or if you're just looking at the possibility of how these things will work. A great way to just start identifying things that developers can start researching, start understanding to see what's possible, so that can also shape your solution, because technical limitations also shapes what your solution looks like. All right, let's keep going. Multiple lists. Account level sharing versus list level sharing. Grocery store or other shopping locations. Integrations with product location APIs. So the idea here is if you've ever searched for something like Home Depot is a great example. If you live in a place or country that has a Home Depot, say I'm searching for, I don't know, some kind of cleaning product or something like that. Or the other day, I was looking for a paintbrush. I was looking for a particular type of paintbrush. And so I was able to go on homedepot.com. I was able to search for it, and it told me not only that it was in stock at the store that I wanted to go to, but it also told me the aisle and the section. Some of those sites have that as an API that you're able to tap into. And so depending on the store and the location and a lot of other factors, but that's something to explore as well. Because if you enter a new item and you have no idea where it would be, it could actually tell you where that is if we're able to integrate with an API like that. So that's also something definitely worth looking into. All right, product location APIs. I want to go shopping when there's fewer people. So if you've looked at like Google Maps, I think Apple Maps does this as well. It now has busyness of a location as well as trends of when are the peak times and the low times. And so it could actually tap into Google, I don't know what to call it, so I'll just call it busyness API. Just something to look into. Share my list with family members. Okay, so I got some of those things. Manually add staples as well. Let's see, staples. So suggestions for rebuying things. Manual override of shopping departments. Whether you can toggle on and off departments. I want to go when there's fewer people. I mean, there's so many different ways that we can go. We could do that. So maybe it's something like calendar integration. Again, integration. Again, we're just throwing things out here. This isn't a to-do list of features. This isn't a wish list. This is really just understanding the implications of these jobs that we have. Okay. So I could keep going for this. You probably want to do this longer than what I'm doing. But again, I'm just showing you the basic steps of how I would solve this. All right, so after we've defined the jobs and then we started dumping the Legos, the next step that we would do is to take this list and to start gathering them up into like-minded things. If you've ever done a card sorting exercise, you're basically doing a card sort for yourself. You're taking all of these concepts, all of these concerns, you're grouping them into similar items, and then From there, you will flush out more things, add more things, and then you'll start having your to-do list of things that you need to start digging into to understand any of these open questions or any of these problems or any of these things that you like to explore. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to start gathering things up. So we're just going to put them down here. We're going to use up this whole space here. So I'll actually drag this over here and we'll start grouping them into sections. So I'm not sure the best way to do this. No, I don't think we want to do cards. I think we want to do shapes. Actually, let's not do it by shapes yet. All right. Items to buy need to be organized by department. Okay, so we'll put that there. Items to buy need to be identified to categorize. Okay, so these things are obviously linked. Checked off items. This relates to frequency, so we're going to toss that down here because basically we need to understand like frequency of how often people buy things. So for example, my wife and I buy coffee creamer probably every 2 weeks, something like that. So for it to suggest it every week would just be just as annoying as it suggesting it once a month. It needs to understand the frequency that I'm running out of things. But then on the flip side, we need to understand quantity as well. Because if I buy double creamer, and sometimes we do this because I like to use heavy creamer for my coffee. My wife likes to use half and half. Sometimes she'll get the small half and half. Sometimes she'll buy the big half and half. That has an impact on frequency too. So bringing back checked off items. Frequency of usage is a part of that. So that's the part that I was just talking about. But then also quantity and size of item bought. Because obviously, if you buy a half gallon of milk, you'll run out faster than if you buy a gallon. Unless it goes bad, then you just buy at the same frequency. All right, syncing and cloud storage. Sharing a list versus sharing accounts. Okay, so these are kind of like account stuff. Multiple lists. We'll toss that over there. Sharing. Accounts. Okay, so now we have multiple accounts. We have online mode. The checklist. So this is basic CRUD. Low friction ways of adding items to my list. That's an important one. That's more of kind of a design consideration, because for something like this, getting people to use it is a lot of different factors, and one of them being it has to be low frequency. If I remember to get something, I should be able to quickly add something to a list without any kind of thought. So even something like this, where for reminders, I actually use Siri for adding things to my shopping list like 90% of the time, because nothing beats being able to just hold down the button on my phone or on my watch and say, hey Siri, can you add blueberries to my grocery shopping list, and just have it done instead of the 5 or 6 taps it takes in order to do that, doing it over the interface as well. So even this, So it'd be low friction ways of adding items to my list. So that could be something like Siri. If our solution is like browser based, so it could be browser plugin maybe. Okay. Account level sharing versus list level sharing. Okay, this kind of goes into accounts and sharing. Grocery store versus other shopping locations. Okay, this is interesting as well. That also reminded me about certain things only being available at certain stores. Sometimes my wife and I will go out of our way to go to a different grocery store because they have a particular thing that we like. And so while it's still part of our groceries, we can't add it to our grocery shopping list because then we have things that we can't possibly check off because the store doesn't carry them. So even that being part of our problem, in fact, we could go back, and this is where we would go back and even add this to our pain points as well, or our jobs of I have to buy things from multiple locations. In fact, let's just go ahead and do this. I think this is a great example of why this process is not linear. You're not going to be able to get everything in one pass. And so you're going to always be finding new jobs. And just because you have jobs in here doesn't mean that you have to solve them. Think of this as more of like a wish list, and you get to pick which things that you want to solve, what kind of problems you want to solve. Buy items from this brings up another interesting thing. Integrations with product location APIs. I think integrations with store stock API as well. Okay. Source stock. I don't know what I was writing here. Integrations with product location APIs. Okay. All right, now that you can kind of see clusters starting to show up, now what we can do is we can group these and we can start giving them labels. So busyness API. Oh wait, no, this is the original list. I still have to gather these. Okay, calendar integration. I think that's kind of a different thing. That's kind of like integrations. Google Busyness API, also kind of an integration. Suggestions for rebuying things. Okay, it goes down here. Toggling of departments. Yeah, that's some CRUD stuff. Manual overrides of departments. Yeah. Okay. No, I think we got it. So now we kind of see some patterns emerging. Organized by department, items being identified. So really this problem set would be, or this group of things would be called something like identifying and Okay. So this is identifying items. What would this be? Integrations with store stock API, something interesting to look at. Do grocery store and other shopping locations. Different product offerings. So this is something I'm kind of thinking about because sometimes there's the scenario of we can't go to our tried and true usual store that we go to, and so we would drop by a grocery store in the area that we're in as well. We're unfamiliar with it. It could be a different chain of grocery store, or we could be like trying to pick up as many of our necessary items as we can from Target, from a bodega or something like that. And so that's something to kind of explore as well, of like, what are the differences in different shopping locations? What happens when a store isn't mapped out by departments? What kind of problems can we solve around different stores having different product offerings? So that's what we're trying to get at with this section as well. Counts and sharing. Actually, this Google Business could be shopping location, and this calendar integration can be I don't actually know what to put it under, so we'll just kind of leave it as is. Clean this up just a hair. Okay. We'll scoot that over a little bit. And we'll tighten this up just so I can get it all on the screen. Now that you've organized some of these items, we'll just kind of leave this. Over there. Okay. So now that we've kind of organized this, now we have a pretty good list of things that we need clarity on, things that we need to explore. And what I've typically done, if we're not using this format, we're not using Figma or FigJam right now, a different way that we would solve this, or a different way that I've approached this, is from here. Now I've marked things as I need clarity on these items, or this is pretty much solved, I just need to do it. So things like multiple lists, it's just something that I would solve in design. I don't really necessarily need to do it. Things like the checklist, that's something that I can kind of explore, or even low friction ways of adding items to my list. Those are all things that I don't really need to look too much into technical limitations. I don't really need to understand kind of the shape of what that could be. But then there's other things that we definitely need to look into before I can design a solution that integrates those things. Things like integration with store stock APIs. I have a feeling those exist, but I haven't looked too much into them. I don't know what they would cost. I don't know if they are even like open source. I know that places like Home Depot have them, but I don't know if that's an open API. That might be something that I would have to scrape from those pages. And if you've ever worked with a developer and scraping page data, it's not super easy to do. It's actually pretty time consuming, and it becomes very fragile because as soon as they redesign their page, now your screen scraper is broken and now that doesn't work anymore. And so by writing these things down, we're able to start digging into those things and start identifying those things that we need to dig a little bit more into, we need to identify, we need to understand before we can start thinking about whether we can offer that as part of our solution. For some simpler things like CRUD and UI, once we start bringing out those things, we can start thinking about what we would offer for an API. So even something like this, like we're starting to see some other like implications of like accounts and sharing. So even for CRUD and API, I can even add things like onboarding and account creation. Because like I said, if we have accounts and we have sharing, and those are problems and jobs that we actually want to solve for, then we have to have accounts from the get-go. You can't do a local only solution because now we have this problem of, if someone was to onboard and they were to just create a list, now they have to, for the first time that they want to share with someone, now they have to go back and create an account. That causes friction in the middle of the process, where a good product strategy is getting those things out of the way in the beginning, rather than having them do it in the middle of something that should be a friction-free flow for you to stop, for you to say, hey, you could share this with other people, and then for you to stop them and say, if you create an account and you turn on syncing and you pay for these premium features, that creates a little bit more friction than it could be worth at that time versus gathering that information in the beginning during the onboarding flow. Now they're invested and now it's easier to do that. So different aspects of product strategy, both of those impact the shape of the solution that you offer. So I'm going to take a break for just a second. Any questions on that so far? Any differences in how you would solve it? All right. So for the next step, I like to do something called breadboarding. So when it comes to designing an app, there is a huge temptation to start with the Chrome. Basically, the framework of how the app is supposed to work. It's super tempting to start with things like, should I use a left rail navigation or a top rail navigation? Should I design the navigation first before I do that? Designing things like dashboards and starting pages, sometimes onboarding. A lot of these things are the way that people typically design these things. And the problem with a lot of those things is that navigation, dashboards, or onboarding, what those are essentially different forms of summaries of what your core functionality is. Think about a dashboard. A dashboard is just little snippets of information or little actions that you can take across your whole app. It's kind of like a sample platter. And so by starting with something like a dashboard, you're trying to pull different bits and pieces of an app that doesn't exist yet. And so it's the same thing with something like an onboarding. An onboarding is the introduction to the core pieces of your app. You haven't defined them yet. Same thing with navigation. It's all of the different sections of your app. You don't know what those are. You don't know how you're going to organize those. And so the best way to start this is, rather than starting with any of those kind of fridge or summary things, it's starting with your core concept. It's starting with the core action that a user would take day to day. So what would that be? It would be the basic CRUD for a list. It's adding things to your list. So if you're not familiar with this term CRUD, you've seen it several times. I apologize if I delayed a little bit. CRUD is a development acronym that a lot of developers use. It stands for create, read, update, and delete or destroy. And for something like a grocery shopping list, all of those aspects are in there. When you're adding things to a list, you're creating things, you're looking at them. I should be able to look at the list. I should be able to update those shopping items, and I should be able to delete them. That's basic CRUD. And so when we're thinking about this, we want to think about starting from the list. How would I go ahead and start a list? Now, this is where a lot of people would jump into UI. I'm still not quite ready to get into UI. And the main reason is because there's so many decisions that you can get caught up in the minutia of a design, like where things go, how big they should be, what it's the context, how much space should be, how much real estate that I have to work with. The most important thing that we want to think about, especially when we're thinking about a product design versus marketing design, is that flow is a huge component of product design. And this is where a lot of designers get hung up on, is that when we're designing for an app, we're really designing for a series of tasks. Users are trying to accomplish tasks. And usually a task is a series of actions. And so there is a flow to how they accomplish these things. And so we can start working through flow without looking at UI just yet. And the way that I do that is through a technique called breadboarding. Breadboarding is a concept used from the Basecamp team. It's something that I didn't know that I was essentially doing this as well. But here's basically how it works. I was doing a form of this, and I didn't really have like a very structured way. Then they came up with a very lightweight way of doing this, and I've adopted their process, and I really like it. So basically works like this. We will take a basic flow of a user trying to accomplish a task. So let's do something like creating a list. Pretty basic, but it's thinking about how a user would accomplish a series of tasks. So let's do something like that. So let's start with creating a list, creating their first list and adding items to it. And then down here, we're going to do a legend just to show you what it looks like. So the way that breadboarding works is that you will have what the user sees, and then we just do a line. What the user does. So this is basically the format of breadboarding. It's really easy, super lightweight. We're basically drawing a series of connections, and for each item, we see what the user sees, what the user does, then what the user sees next, and what the user does next. Super straightforward. We're going to group this together. We're going to call this our legend. Then I'm going to show you what this looks like in practice. I'll put the legend down there because I'm in the bottom left corner. All right. So we actually have, let's ungroup this. All right, so if our flow is creating a list and adding items to it, let's see what this would look like. Okay, so what the user would see first. So we would imagine something like, okay, where would they start? It would be okay, so I would imagine it'd be something like they would see a list of available shopping lists that they could create. So if we're doing some kind of onboarding, so they could have existing ones, they want to create one. So this would show the available list. This would also be just blank, and it would just say a prompt to create lists if it's empty. So it'd be available lists or blank list of, it's like a list of lists actually. Now what could we imagine this would be next? It could be something like list name field. So it could be they do the name of the list first. But we've talked a lot about when we dumped the Legos. We've talked a lot about things like the store stock API, understanding if a store has items in stock, where those locations are, how that store is organized even, because the layouts of stores are different as well. You could enter the produce section first in one store, and you could enter the dairy section on a different store. Usually they kind of follow the basic principle or kind of basic same layout, but that would also impact it first, because if the app always puts the bakery first, but the bakery is the last thing when you enter the store, then that's also not very useful. And so understanding store layout and our preferences for categories could be a good way to approach it as well. So this is we're already seeing why that concept of dumping the Legos is super useful, because it allows us to explore these problems, these questions, these things that we would understand. And it would be something that you would dig into before you got into breadboarding, but I'm doing this in an hour, so we don't have time. All right, so let's keep going with this flow. So we'll do that, And then we'll add a connector. So they can name the list. So we could link the store. Could be the next thing. All right, so they could name all right. So we're imagining this flow. So the available list of blank lists. We'll just call it shopping lists, just for clarity. So they create a new list. All right. So now they have the name field. So they name the list. They link the store. Select store from list. There could be some optional fields as well. Again, if I explore this a little bit more, I would have a little bit more clarity on this, but we're just gonna kind of wing it here because even this is just opening up some new questions. Do we, rather than naming the list, if this was associated with a store, then we wouldn't have to name it. Because if this was just my grocery store that I have nearby me is Sprouts. So if I just select the location first, I wouldn't have to name it. I would just be my Sprouts list. And now I don't have to deal with that. That gets tricky. The downside of that would be something like it's irregular where I'm going shopping. It's just wherever I'm nearby, because sometimes that happens as well. And so that could be a little tricky as well. So those are some of the considerations that were already coming to light just through creating this process. Well, let's keep going. So imagine that we're sending the user links the store. Okay, actually, so let's call this select store. They select store from list. Then they, what's next? Okay, so then they can go back and edit those items. So it's list of things that they've selected so far. Finish creating list. So after they finish creating, we would probably show them their new list. And the way you just end this kind of series is to just end on a single item. All right. Try to zoom in a little bit on this. There we go. Okay. So this is essentially how you would start breadboarding. Now you can see why I like using this technique, because there's a couple of things that happen. I'm able to think through this list and the series of how I want to do things. So even in doing this list, things have come to light that I might want to reconsider. So even like what I was talking about where I wouldn't have to name it if I just selected the store. And so maybe a different way that I want to do this is instead of this way, I could just swap these two items. And doing it in Figma is really easy because I could just do something like this. Now doing this allows you to quickly iterate, to think through flows. Because once you start getting into UI, you start thinking, you have to start worrying about things like spacing and hierarchy. And this can get really slow and cumbersome because you make a lot of small UI decisions. By doing this as a breadboard, you're able to nail the thing that you're supposed to do right now, which is just think about what would be that series of tasks in order to accomplish their goal. And it accomplishes it at a level of fidelity that you don't have to worry about unnecessary things. Now, this technique is a little tricky if you are kind of new to this abstract way of thinking, because even in the way that you've seen me do this, you've probably thought, if you're not used to it, you're thinking like, how did you think about those edge cases? How would you consider something like that? And it just comes with practice. So doing something like this comes with practice. It's a lot of experience with designing things like this and kind of knowing about what kind of problems and edge cases you'll have, but it comes with time, I promise. Okay. Now I'm running at 1.5 hours, so I'm probably going to be wrapping up pretty soon, but I just want to show you one more thing along the lines of breadboarding, and then we'll finish up for the day. We'll pick this up probably next week as well. So another thing that I haven't created or I haven't shown you an aspect of breadboarding is also what do you have, what does it look like for branching solutions as well? So if you have a branch, or like two different options that a user can take, what we'll do is we'll just add another line here, and we will just change it to, I don't know where it is, dotted line. Here we go. So if you have branching like flows that users can take, you could just do it like this. So now it could be something like this, what a user does next if they select that option, option 1, or what a user does next, option 2, will go down to this option. So we could show something like this. All right, excuse me. So in this second example of how we would do this, say we decide that we really want to rely on the location making things easier. And so we want to really push for a user selecting location if they have location, if we have it somewhere in our database, and if it's something that they want to select, say they shop at the same place all the time. So how would we design for something like that? So we could say that maybe our option is they start from selection from the available lists or blank list of shopping lists. They create a new list, and then the first thing they want to do is select the store. So now we can diverge this, and we could say that they either select from the list of stores, or if they don't have it in their, if we don't have it in our database, or they just say like, I don't care, it's just generic shopping list. Or selects no store. Okay, so now we actually save this step from the users who have selected a store, because we don't need to name it if it's named after the store. At least that's the idea here. And so what we could do is only if we select no store, then they can name it. So we'll do it that way. So we could kind of explore, whoop. We'll do no store, or we'll do this here. So already we're starting to think through saving the user time if we have some unnecessary steps. Because the user doesn't need to name it if we could just pull from the name of the store. And so this is really beneficial to just be able to merge these steps here. And now, actually got to make these both solid. So you can see how we're starting to solve some of these problems really early on. So now we have some branching logic. We know that we only have to show them this interface of creating a list if, or we only need to show them this interface for naming the list if they opt for no store. And in fact, we could also do other things as well, because pulling from the store name could also tell us if it's a grocery store, a pharmacy, a hardware store as well. And so even that, very quickly, we're starting to poke holes in our interface and be able to add things. So now, instead of just, look at my wonky lines, ridiculous. What kind of designer do you think I am? Okay. So now, say, okay, because I also, I don't know anything about this because they select no store or custom store. Something like that. Then it could be name and also type of store. So already we're starting to see how these things are linked together. We can start picking out what kind of things that we need to design on these screens and what these would look like. So what's also great about breadboarding is after I would do these initial flows, I would do probably 5 to 15 more, depending on how complex the app is, to try to nail the MVP. And then once you do these, you start picking out patterns of where these starting points are. So you can start seeing like this starting point of available lists. Well, this could be basically our dashboard or our homepage, or it could be some kind of navigation item. Maybe one list is selected by default. Maybe it's just a sidebar navigation, a top navigation, but we can start figuring out where the intersections are on our app. And then we can start making decisions about what the shape of those pages would look like. So we can understand, what would that landing page be when they first log in? What would that look like? Is it a list of all of the lists? Is it just their default list, whatever they selected? Is it some kind of other dashboard option? By breadboarding first, you're able to think about how a user would accomplish individual tasks, and then you can start picking out patterns of how they would overlap. So that's where I'm going to end for today. It's a good hour and a half. I think that's a solid stream. Thank you all for joining me. I'm going to swap over here to just my camera. I hope that was useful. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, I'm going to add some links down in the comments for just some of the things that I've referenced. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out on Twitter or ping me down in the comments below. If you want anything that you want covered, or if you have questions about anything that I've already covered today, go ahead and let me know. I would love to help out. I hope this was helpful. I hope you've taken away some tools and techniques that you can apply to your own design work and maybe your own side projects as well. And join me next week. We'll probably pick up where we left off. Maybe we'll cover some new things, maybe some questions as well. Don't really know. I don't really plan things. Not really good at that. So thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.